What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Tuesday, January 23rd, 2018. Getting into the week here. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone, put you on the air with your comments and questions. Boy, what a rocking and rolling time we're having around the world. And they had this 7.9 magnitude earthquake off the Alaska coast. And, of course, that set off tsunami alerts, warnings, watches all along the Pacific Northwest, Canadian coast, Alaska coast, and, of course, here in Hawaii. And, of course, our watch was canceled about 1 o'clock this morning, but we're getting all the alerts from the Emergency Management Agency. And the first one came on out, tsunami warning, and this time we really mean it. So trying to get us to trust them again. Apparently, up in Alaska, they're still allowed to have fireworks. And apparently, when the tsunami watch was called off and there wasn't going to be one, apparently people went outside middle of the night and just fired off a bunch of fireworks. Got a video of that up at whatreallyhappened.com. And I imagine if I had access to fireworks and I'd been living in an inundation zone, I'd probably want to do exactly the same thing. But we're not allowed to have fireworks anymore here in Hawaii because we're a liberal state. Okay, there's been a tragedy over in Kentucky at a high school. A student, 15-year-old student, just went on a shooting rampage, and he killed two people, one a boy, the other a girl, also 15 years old. The girl died at the scene, the boy died in the hospital, and apparently several people, 14 people, were wounded. And looking at a picture of this kid, he's obviously a wannabe gangsta. And you're wondering, first of all, what's he learning at school in terms of socialization? And more importantly, where are the parents? What were they teaching him? Or are they both working two jobs and this guy's entire social upbringing has been what he sees on TV? It's amazing here. Now, progressives are in a snit, if you will, over the ending of the government shutdown. Apparently, a lot of these illegal immigration amnesty people thought the Democrats should have just kept the government shut down no matter what. And they're very upset that the Democrats have appeared to cave in, at least for the moment. But the progressives are out there. They're angry. You should have kept going. We had a chance to make all these illegal immigrants into legal Democratic voters. Now, somebody just went on out and did a poll and found, to no real surprise, that the majority of Americans want massive cuts to legal immigration and an end to the illegal immigration. They want this to shut down the same way that people in Europe want their refugee crisis shut down. They're tired of all the problems that it's causing, economic, medical, crime, all of it. Now, I don't think the issue is over, okay, because this spending bill they passed is only for 3 weeks. And I think when it comes up again, the Democrats, once again, are going to rally their forces, and they're going to do a shutdown saying we will not vote for an extended spending bill until we get amnesty for the illegal immigrants. And these are the Democrats who hold the illegal immigrants in much higher regard than legal American citizens, because, you know, you can't trust those legal American citizens to vote Democratic. Some of them actually vote Republican. We can't trust them. So that's what this is really all about. Rigging the next elections by flooding the voting booths with illegal immigrant voters. And again, illegal immigrants are not entitled to vote in this country. That's why there's supposed to be voter ID, which of course the Democrats are. No, it's racist to have to show ID to vote. No, it isn't. It's confirming that you have the legal right to be voting. It's not racist when you have to have a driver's license to operate a car. It's not racist when you need a pilot's license to fly a plane. It's not racist when you need a medical license to operate on somebody. Only when it comes to the elections are the Democrats out there screaming that having to show a license, that's just racist. They're trying to steal the next 2 elections because they're angry they weren't able to steal this last one. Okay, apparently the Schumer shutdown cave-in, it may blow back on them in the midterm elections this November, because the American people saw how the Democrats shut down the government over this illegal immigrant issue. That's going to work against them. And now a lot of the leftists are saying the Democrats can't get anything done. Now that levels the playing field with Donald Trump and the Republicans, because the Democrats and the corporate media have been screaming they're not able to get anything done. The whole government is paralyzed over this issue. But the Democrats are probably going to pay a very heavy price this November for what they just did. Okay, we're going to do a shout out now to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Getting on into the domestic political situation here. Apparently, not too long ago, Robert Mueller questioned U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions regarding this Russian collusion story. Mueller's getting desperate. He's been at this for a year. He's spent millions of dollars. He hasn't found anything. But apparently, Mueller is taking the tack that President Trump's firing of FBI Director James Comey was an effort to obstruct the agency's Russia probe. So they're trying to gin up an obstruction of justice charge with which to move forward on impeachment. In all my years of being alive, I've never seen politics get dirtier than it is right now. More and more of the Peter Strzok, Lisa Page texts are surfacing. Apparently, the FBI may have claimed to have lost them, but there were other copies out there. And apparently in one of his texts, Peter Strzok is admitting the Mueller witch hunt is just another nothing burger. He hasn't found anything. And meanwhile, of course, you have all the documented crimes of the Clinton Foundation, Uranium One. There's collusion with the Russians. Everybody's staying away from it. We got to get Trump. We got to get Trump. Trey Gowdy is out there saying that he's discovered FBI agents from some of their texts and emails were discussing how to avoid text being captured. Because when you're using your official phone on official business, everything is recorded. It's all public record. It all belongs to the taxpayer. And FBI agents apparently were discussing how to get around this. Well, that obviously means using a private cell phone or a cheap burner somewhere. Yes, now, Senate Judiciary Committee Chair Grassley is demanding answers about this so-called insurance policy against the Trump victory, and the FBI brass using secret untraceable phones to talk about Hillary Clinton. And apparently Fox News has published now a portion of the approximately 10,000 text messages sent between FBI agent Peter Strzok and lawyer Lisa Page. And among the messages is the one talking about this insurance policy. And the story is that right after Donald Trump won the election, some of the top FBI brass got together and formed this little team to basically find a way to get Trump out of power. Because, as we're finding out now from the investigations into the investigations, the FBI is dirty, the Department of Justice is dirty, the Clinton Foundation was certainly dirty. They're all concerned about losing their jobs. They were all counting on Hillary Clinton being the next president and keeping the lid on all the crime and corruption. So, apparently there was this secret society. And we remember what John F. Kennedy said about secret societies. And they were meeting inside the FBI. And they started the day after the election. Now, everybody is still fighting back and forth over this FISA memo. And there's been a bogus memo put on out. Somebody has recycled another memo about FISA from April of last year, and they're showing that around and saying it's being leaked. No, that's not it. The memo under contention is still under wraps, and they're fighting back and forth about it. And, this memo was compiled by House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes and fellow Republicans, and it claims that senior federal officials abused a secret surveillance system commonly known as FISA. Not that it's all that secret, of course. And they did it to target and undermine the Trump campaign. So what we have here are the Department of Justice and the FBI working to undermine first candidate Trump and then President Trump. I don't know if that meets the legal definition of treason, but it's certainly an internal coup d'etat taking place. Now, Jeff Sessions is saying that they will leave no stone unturned to find the FBI agents' missing text messages, although the word is around that, yeah, there are copies of them. Apparently, the Inspector General had a copy of them as well. But Sessions is out there talking tough about it. And again, what the FBI claims to have lost them. All right, let's take a phone call. Kevin in West Virginia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing fine.
I guess you're aware that the congressional memo was released today. And it's also on the DNI website, Director of National Intelligence website.
I actually had not heard that. I missed that. Where is it located again?
DNI, the Director of National Intelligence website, I guess is dni.org.
Okay, I'll have to take a look at that.
It was released earlier today
it
through
says
Alex Jones.
The domain DNI.org may be for sale by its owner, so obviously, all right, I'll have to hunt it down over the commercial break.
Okay, yeah, it's I don't know who the Director of National Intelligence is at the top of my head, but it was obviously was declassified today by Trump and pushed out by the Director of National Intelligence today, and was released. Like I said earlier, I'm guessing around 1 o'clock Eastern time today.
Okay.
Maybe.
I'm not.
Not seeing it.
I'm not seeing it in a Google search. It's saying the memo may be released by Nunes. That's 2 hours ago. I'm not seeing that it's actually out yet.
It's released. Bill Binney had a copy of it too.
Well, if that's the memo that he shared with Alex Jones, then I'm kind of wondering what the fuss was all about, because we know that FISA has been abusing the system to spy on American citizens, and at least the version that was over on Alex Jones' website, I didn't think it was that big a deal. So it begs the question, what were they fighting over? And have they decided to do a limited hangout by releasing a memo but not the memo? Because the way they were fighting over it back and forth, you would have thought that it would have been the scandal of all scandals buried in there. And I have a copy of that. And again, it's dated April of last year. So I'm not. I'm going to have to dig into this a little bit more. I'm not sure we're getting the real memo. I think they're trying to make this go away.
From what I'm understanding, there's two different memos. There's a memo that Bill Binney released on InfoWars today.
Yes.
And then there's supposed to be another memo that's, I guess, a summary of what this memo is that was released today.
Well, the one that William Binney has is only a few pages long. It's hard to summarize something that's, well, no, I'm sorry. It's about 20, 30 pages long. But yeah, the one that they were talking about in Congress was only 4 pages, so that's got to be a summary of something else, and maybe that's it. I'll have to hunt it down over the commercial break. I haven't seen the 4-page memo. I've only seen the 20-page memo.
Okay, well, that's all I wanted to tell you, and was trying to get it out there. That, I mean, I don't think like you. We all knew what was in there, you know. We all know they're abusing the power, but I mean, at least there's official documentation now. To maybe go after these can we call them traitors?
Well, definitely they're abusers of the system. They're violating the Constitution, and that's what treason. But definitely unconstitutional, exceeding authority, abuse of power, and a coup d'etat against the President of the United States of America.
Well, you have a great day, sir, and I hope Claire's feeling so much better it's not even funny that she will be on the air Friday. And I love you guys, and you guys have a great day.
All right, thanks. I can't make any promises. Claire's having a really rough time. I'm very worried about her. After the show today, I'm taking her back to the chiropractor. We're trying to find another doctor who will take Medicare patients so we can get her some pain medication because the over-the-counter stuff isn't do it. But I'm beginning to think that she's really seriously hurt herself, and I'm really having to just scold her to not move and give it a chance to heal. She thinks she's tougher than this is, and she's not. She's in the other room. She just shouted, no, she's not. Well, finally she's listening to reason. But, I'm very worried about her. I'm very, very worried about her. All right, let's take another phone call. Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Sorry to hear about Claire. Just quickly regarding the memo, it seems like if it's the wrong memo, at least one or two of the congressmen that were excitedly telling us about the memo would say this is not the right one. But that's not why I called.
That would
the
make
reason
sense.
I called is, So the reason I called is two quick things. One, definitely disappointed if there's no more video stream. And if you haven't 100% made up your mind about that, please consider that there's a lot of us that would really feel cut off and disappointed to lose that personal connection to your show. And
Okay.
The other thing is regarding your Bitcoin, that you can receive donations from Bitcoin on your website.
Yes.
Regarding that topic. Okay, so you won't have much success with receiving Bitcoin specifically because the transaction fees are anywhere from $15 to $50. So it would cost somebody on average right now $20 to send you a $5 donation. Bitcoin is used like a gold brick. It's a store of value, but it's not practical. So I'll just recommend one that you yourself mentioned a couple of days ago. You had a story about somebody who got rich from Dash, which is
Yes.
a cryptocurrency called Dash. So because you mentioned it, I'll just say I agree with you. That's an interesting one. The last time I used Dash, it cost me 0.00001 Canadian cent to send $100.
Yeah.
So if you were to change it to accepting Dash, then you would probably get 10 times more donations. And that's everything. I'll get off the phone and have a great day. Hope Claire gets well soon.
All right. I thank you very much for the kind thoughts here. And I'm looking, and there was still a problem with the stream. There should be a comment up there that with a link that goes to YouTube. See, the problem is when I'm actually doing the show, I can't debug the code. And that's what's making this very, very difficult. So let's do that. I'll get this working. I've got a lot of stuff fixed on the site today. Chat's working again, and so all kinds of stuff is finally getting fixed. But I will get the video stream back up and running. And the YouTube link in the right menu now goes to the correct archive page for these YouTube videos that we are now making. Alrighty, getting on back to the news here. Interesting little story. Oh, it's time for a commercial. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And yeah, I'm afraid we're still not getting the live stream link. It's probably a coding problem on my end. But I got to tell you, navigating around YouTube is very difficult if you're trying to do something other than watch videos. For one thing, every other button you hit just gives you a page of, oh, wouldn't you like to look at this? Okay, all right, getting on back to the story. I'm still not seeing that the 4-page memo has actually been released, but if it's a summary of the one from last April, again, for those of us who've been paying attention, we know it's been going on. I'm sure it's going to be shocking to the American people who really still believe that we have an honest and ethical and well-behaved government. Okay, story coming out of the Gateway Pundit. Apparently, additional text messages sent and received by Peter Strzok were recently handed over to Congress. And apparently, there's an exchange between Strzok and Lisa Page about how hackers likely obtained an email exchange between then President Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And apparently, this leak of sensitive information was covered up by the FBI after the incident was removed from Comey's closing statement on Clinton's email investigation. So the FBI knew that because of the poor security around Hillary's email, that sensitive information had come on out. Now, at this point, the FBI's reputation is pretty much in the Al-Qaeda. And over at Zero Hedge, they have an article saying destroying and suppressing evidence is FBI standard procedure, and yes, it is. What they'll do is declare a high-level investigation. They'll get together the evidence. They'll come up with a cover story. They'll keep the evidence that supports the desired outcome, and they'll destroy the rest. Happens all the time. Remember when they destroyed the interview notes with Lee Harvey Oswald? So that's what the FBI is really all about. And if you're not sure about what's going on, in the permanent articles index at the top of my page in that little gray box under my smiling face, there's an item called COINTELPRO, which if you're my age, you will remember this scandal from the 1960s. So you might want to look at that page. Now, Representative Ron DeSantis is saying, I don't believe the FBI. Phone, text messages just don't disappear in a glitch. And he's absolutely right. What about the backup tapes? What about the NSA? Story coming out of Sputnik News. Both the National Security Agency and the FBI have recently failed to comply with orders to preserve specific data, with one body claiming it didn't have enough storage to follow through, and the other saying the trove was accidentally erased. Well, come on, people. You can buy a shirt pocket terabyte drive for just a few bucks these days. So don't give me this idea that you are out of storage. It was the same excuse they had over when the Climate Gate first exploded out of Hadley Climate Research Unit, and other climatologists were saying, let us look at the raw data. And Hadley said, oh, we didn't keep the raw data. We didn't have enough room on the computers. Just take our word for it. Humans are warming the earth. You're all going to die unless you give Al Gore money. So William Binney was apparently being interviewed on Sputnik Radio and said that the fact that both the NSA and the FBI got rid of data they'd been specifically asked to retain shows that the information was deliberately deleted, since the hardware would also have to be tossed. That's not necessarily true. You can overwrite the disk. There's even a mil-spec version of that, of overwriting the disk here. So Binney's a little off on that one. Well, Russiagate is now exploding on everybody, and part of it's going to be tied into that memo, the FISA memo, when it finally comes on out, and the latest is it may come on out later today. But again, there's nothing there. And all the people who were involved in trying to promote this story have been found to have been behaving illegally, outside their authority, unethically. This was an attempt at a coup d'etat against a sitting president of the United States of America. Now, whether you like Trump or not, and I will admit I like him a lot less than the day he won his election. He is the president. He was elected by the people. And we cannot tolerate this idea of a coup d'etat, or for that matter, an assassination. That's not what America is about. And we know the people trying the coup d'etat, they're not doing it for noble purposes. They're not doing it for the benefit of the people or the good of the nation. They're doing it out of personal greed and a desire to not go to jail for the crimes they've been committing for the last 30 years. That's what's going on here. They're willing to wreck the country to evade justice. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to our show, and as it turns out, the memo that has been released is the original 100-page memo from last year. So the 4-page memo that's been circulating around Congress does not appear to be out yet, although that may be imminent according to what I'm seeing on the various news services. All right, now getting on back to the news here. There was a very bizarre story that came out earlier today, and the original story was that current FBI Director Christopher Wray was threatening to resign if Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe is removed. And everybody's out there saying, what's going on? Major upset in the FBI. However, the White House has issued a statement saying that did not happen, that Christopher Wray has not threatened to resign. Interesting indications of some back-channel turmoil here. Now, here's a story basically to remind you that all of this skullduggery and this unconstitutional spying on Americans has actually been going on for a very long time. Back in 2004, the New York Times, 2 reporters, learned that George W. Bush was secretly wiretapping Americans and collecting their phone and email records. The reporters wanted to publish the story, but the New York Times management was basically lobbied by the administration to hold off on the story based on the idea that this was classified material and it had to be protected. But the story finally did run after Bush won his second term. After that, apparently, it wasn't unclassified. So there we are. Now, the other day, in fact, it was yesterday, we were talking about Marcia Ann Bosley. She was the head housekeeper at the governor's mansion under then-Governor Bill Clinton. And she was mysteriously let go in 1985. No explanation given. And she had no family. She was single. It was assumed that she had left the area for other opportunities, and that was the end of the story. However, they have now found and identified her body in a shallow grave in Arkansas, wrapped in plastic, and they've discovered she was pregnant at the time of death. And here's the part that's really going to get interesting. Apparently, she was so well wrapped, the DNA has been preserved of the fetus. And forensic examiners are saying they're going to be able to find out who the father was. That will be very interesting to come on out there. They have legitimate grounds to compel a DNA sample from Bill Clinton, and that would certainly help little Danny Williams in his situation. Okay, let's talk about the war zones, because there is a lot going on. And let me preface it by saying, those of you who've been following me for a while know that my home overlooks Pearl Harbor and the air base beyond it. And normally I make a point of not talking about what goes on down there for the obvious reasons here. But today I feel compelled to mention there's been a lot of heavy military aviation overhead all morning long. Transport planes taking off. In fact, there goes another one right now. And I note that Pearl Harbor is almost completely empty. There's a couple of underway replenishment ships. And I think one Aegis cruiser is still down there. But it's an empty place. So something may be getting ready to happen over in the Western Pacific. But let's start with Syria, because that's where the action is. And apparently Syrian Kurdish forces have launched a powerful counterattack against Turkey. And Turkey was obviously hoping for a quick victory in Afrin. The Kurds have got another idea about that. So this situation is rapidly heating up. And story out of Sputnik News says that Turkey's presence in Afrin shows that the complex Syrian conflict is nowhere near ending. And of course, that suits the United States just fine. So right now, the U.S. is in this very odd position of it's like being a juggler. They're dealing with Turkey, the Syrian Kurds, Syria itself, trying to juggle between them. And of course, Turkey is supposed to be a U.S. ally. The Syrian Kurds are supposed to be an ally, and they're fighting each other, using weapons, at least the Kurds are using weapons supplied by the United States. Now, it looks like U.S. policy is confused. It lacks focus. There's a story out of Russia today basically saying that U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is flailing as Washington struggles to avoid being completely shut out of Syria by its own allies, following a crisis that the U.S. provoked just days ago with that border force. Now, there's been an attack on a hotel in Kabul, Afghanistan. At least 30 people killed, including Ukrainians, Kazakhs, and apparently some Americans as well. So Afghanistan is also heating up. Story coming out of FARS News. The U.S. seeks continued conflicts. Well, yes. The U.S., for one thing, is in the business of manufacturing and selling weapons all over the world. The more war, the more money. Isn't it going to be cool here? So the top military aide to the Iranian Supreme Leader, Major General Yahya Rahim Safavi, is warning of the U.S. provocative acts in the region, especially Syria, adding that Washington seeks to keep the regional conflicts alive. And then Iran shoots its own credibility down by beginning a military exercise in the strategic Strait of Hormuz. And in a late development, and this could be the signal for a regional war, Turkey is now offering to form a military coalition with Iraq, with Syria, and with Iran to eliminate the Kurdish dissent to begin with and to confront the Saudi axis. Now, if Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran all come together as one military or political unit, they will be formidable. Even Saudi Arabia is not going to be able to deal with that. And that, of course, that kind of coalition or cooperation or coming together is exactly what the United States has been trying to prevent in the Mideast for all these decades. They want the Mideast broken up into lots and lots of little tiny countries that are easy to push around. Because of U.S. provocations in some of those countries, now they're saying, we're going to come together. Just like following Neville Chamberlain's failure of peace in our time, the rest of the world came together against Japan, fascist Italy, and Nazi Germany. It's starting to happen. And not satisfied with all the bloodshed, apparently now Trump is menacing Pakistan. And apparently because of the provocations down there and the withdrawal of funds and accusations of hotbed of terror, Pakistan has cut off a major supply route that the U.S. was using to get into Afghanistan. So now the U.S. and Afghanistan is now shelling the border of Pakistan. This thing is spiraling completely out of control. A lot of people are talking about a coming Russia-Ukraine war. And apparently somebody's doing polling both in Russia and in Ukraine. And the common assumption among the people is, yes, it's only a matter of time. So the situation in Donbass has been a feature of Russia's political talk shows for the past couple of years. And apparently after the elections, which are March 18th, there may be a development there as well. Mike Pence is still in Israel, playing tourist over there. He's visited the Western Wall and the Holocaust Museum. And apparently he's not being followed around by people with signs about Jerusalem anymore here. Now, Gilad Atzmon, you know him, world-class saxophonist, peace activist. We've had him on the show. He's got a new article out there called Anti-Semitism, Reality or Merely Statistics. And he's basically pointing out how all of a sudden the press is full of rising anti-Semitism, the Jews are under threat, and he's basically looking at it and saying the numbers don't really add up. The numbers don't support the hysteria. And that is very alarming, because every time Israel is getting ready to do something really, really nasty, they'll play the Holocaust card. Oh, we're victims. We must defend ourselves from whoever we're going to be attacking next. Now, North Korea is very concerned because under the pretext of security for the Olympics, the United States is sending a lot of strategic assets to the coast of the Korean Peninsula, and that may explain a lot of this activity that I'm seeing out here as well. And remember, the U.S. promised to suspend military drills with South Korea during the 2018 Olympics. But the U.S. has been boosting its forces near the Korean Peninsula since the beginning of the year. So once again, what the U.S. government says and what the U.S. government does are two completely separate things. Now, Tokyo has started holding their first ever missile attack drills. And this may be about ramping up the fear factor, just like that false alarm that they had in Japan and here in Hawaii. They're not having drills here in Hawaii yet. There's really no place to go. I mean, if you're downtown Honolulu, you can get into a building. But for most of the state, we're living in these very thin-walled houses. There's clearing all around. And there are no bomb shelters. They would be prohibitively expensive here because everything underneath the topsoil is congealed lava, and it's got the hardness of poured concrete. I mean, if you did have the resources to dig a bomb shelter, this would be good stuff to dig it in. Situation. Apparently, the United States Coast Guard has decided to add cruise missiles to their icebreakers. Apparently, they're expecting there's going to be a battle for the Arctic with Russia. Well, in terms of icebreakers, Russia's already ahead. In fact, there's this interesting video where some people were driving across the Arctic on cars. Maybe it's another Top Gear episode being filmed. And they happened to see one of these gigantic Russian nuclear-powered icebreakers just go sailing on through. Those are magnificent ships. Absolutely magnificent ships. All right, we're going to talk about the economic news now. A lot of stuff going on. Over in Great Britain, one of their major supermarket chains is Sainsbury's. It would be like the equivalent of Safeway here in the United States. And apparently they're going through a major shakeup. They're changing the way they manage the stores, and the end result is they're going to be letting thousands of people go. They're not saying exactly how much, but they're letting a bunch of people go. Another major supermarket chain, Tesco, has announced it's cutting 1,700 shop floor management jobs. It's another indication that the holiday shopping season wasn't really that much of a holiday after all. Now, if you have a cable box, you've probably seen a channel called Vice, and apparently they're not doing very well. The millennials are not tuning in, and that was their target demographic. And apparently Viceland Canada is going to be shutting down. They're basically going off the air, and it terminated its $100 million deal with the Millennial Digital Media Company, citing poor ratings and massive revenue loss. Well, one problem is the name. The first time I saw it pop up, I thought, what, we've got a new porn channel or something. So people may not have just tuned in at the beginning. Now, I did look at it, and they had some interesting program, but it wasn't all that good. And I guess it's only a matter of time before Vice as a whole here in the United States follows suit. Got to be careful what you call your channels, I think. Russia has added a record 223 tons of gold to their reserves last year alone. That's an increase of 13.8% 50% in their total gold holdings in just 1 year. And their gold buying spree is continuing. There's talk that they're going to use it to back a new solid currency to challenge the dollar. U.S. economists are saying, oh, it's no big deal. I mean, we've got much more gold than Russia down in Fort Knox. Oh, really? Can we count it? The gold in Fort Knox has not been counted in half a century. Now, following the Nixon shock, their questions were raised. Is the people's gold still in Fort Knox? And they had a press event. They went into Fort Knox. I loved where somebody had written on the wall, "Odd job died here." And they opened one vault, and there was a wall of gold bricks. And nobody was allowed to touch them. Nobody was allowed to test them. Nobody was allowed to peek behind to see if the gold continued to the back wall or if it was just a facade. No other vault doors were open. That was it. See, look at all the pretty gold. It's all here. Nothing to worry about. And it's come out since then that a lot of institutions that are trusted with other people's gold have been playing games with it. Now, apparently the retail apocalypse is now hitting the banking sector because, well, partly going to a bank is less and less necessary in this age of rapid technology and plastic cards. I still go to a bank because I still like dealing in cash, but apparently a record number of bank locations closed in 2017, and they're expecting more to come in 2018. That's certainly not the story around here. Bank of Hawaii just opened a brand new branch down here at the shopping mall. U.S. banks suffer a 20% jump in credit card losses. They're out there handing credit cards to people. It's like a subprime credit card crisis now. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. So we're talking about how U.S. banks are suffering a 20% jump in credit card losses. In other words, a combination of, well, most banks actually don't make good if you get swindled, if somebody steals your credit information. They used to. That was their guarantee to get you to use the card. If somebody gets your card information, you know, we'll protect you from fraud and we'll cover the losses. They still try and protect from fraud. They're still doing that. But you can wind up paying for the losses if you're not careful. That's one aspect. The big part, though, is people who have gotten behind on their credit cards and they're not able to make the payments in this declining economy. And it's really piled up. And in a way, it's, I think you could call it a subprime credit card crisis, because trying to keep this little Ponzi scheme, debt-based currency running, they were handing out credit cards to everybody, just left and right like crazy. I get credit card offers all the time. They go right in the shredder. I'm trying to pay off the few cards that we have. I don't want to go deeper into debt. I'm trying to get out. And so should you be, by the way. The other big problem facing the banks is the student debt crisis. It's bad. It is getting worse. In the long run, they're expecting the majority of these students will default on their loans because the high-paying jobs they were told would await them on graduation aren't there. And you have people with these college degrees, they're working in fast food restaurants, they're working in supermarkets, stocking shelves. And you can't pay those student loans and have a place to live on that kind of money. That's why so many millennials are still staying at home with their parents. Now, out in California, which is already dealing with its own fiscal crisis, for some reason the state payroll increased by $1 billion last year, twice as fast as the year before that. Either a lot of people are getting some really generous raises or they're hiring a lot of people, probably the latter, to deal with the illegal immigrants and all the other problems there. Now, here's a good story, and this is something that people ought to be thinking about in their own community. Over in Denver, starting back in 2016, late 2016, Denver Human Services started hiring the homeless to shovel mulch and other day labor. And the good news is they did such a good job, they wound up finding real employment. Just getting on out there and being seen to work and work hard, they were able to get real jobs. They're not homeless anymore. It's a great idea. And we could probably do some more of that. And as a matter of fact, the city of Fort Worth has gone along. They're paying homeless people to pick up trash to clean up the city and turn their lives around. They're getting $10 an hour. All right, we're going to take a break for station identification, and we will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, and we're going to take up a phone call, starting with Herman in Georgia. Aloha, Herman. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing good.
Oh, great. About last mid-May or early June, a caller made mention about Comet Shoemaker Levy 9. Do you remember?
Comet Shoemaker Levy 9 was a long, long time ago. Claire and I were still living in North Hollywood when that happened.
Yes, and the caller, and you made mention of that, and the caller was saying then that President Trump would recognize Jerusalem as the capital. But you quickly cut me off before I could give my guess on the next series of events.
Well, go ahead and give us another guess.
Oh, okay. The halfway point is about 13 or 14 months away. That's that 7-year period, depending on when the barley crop in Israel is found to be ripe enough for the first fruit offering after the 12th month.
Okay, now I remember why I said goodbye the last time. Okay, thanks enough. Bye-bye.
You remember.
I remember. All right, we're going to go to Dave in Hungary. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike.
Hey.
I'd like to get some commentary and analysis from you and any members of the listening audience who are so inclined on how the president might use the current government shutdown to his advantage. Donald Trump has been subjected to a steady rain of grenades from every point on the political compass ever since he announced his candidacy.
Yes.
And he's become very adept at pulling the pins and throwing them back at great tactical advantage. I'm thinking there are legions of overpaid and basically parasitic government employees at agencies like Department of Education, miseducation as it might be, IRS, and that nest of
IRS is not part. IRS is not part of the government. IRS is a private corporation.
Oh, God help us! But in any case, there is a lot of fat that can be trimmed. And I'm wondering whether some mechanism might be put together by any capable staffers Trump has for carrying over the government shutdown in ways that could be used to debride the government agencies of parasitic hangers-on and thus save a lot of money. It seems that there should be some mechanism, and I recall Reagan had successfully done actions like that, albeit at a lower level than I think Trump needs to. I'd just like to get some commentary from the listeners and from you as to whether that might be possible. That would save an awful lot of money.
Part of the problem is twofold. One, there are very powerful unions for government workers, public workers, and they carry huge voting blocks. You don't want to annoy them. The other one is that because of those unions, it's actually very difficult to fire a government worker. I mean, they have to do something really horrible to get fired. I mean, these days, if they sexually harass somebody of the opposite sex, they can be let go, but that's the exception that proves the rule. We're constantly hearing stories about people who do incredibly stupid things and they keep their jobs, like the guy down here who we are told accidentally sounded that missile alert. He was reassigned, but he kept his job.
Oh, I'm aware of that. I was government functionary myself for a while, DOD.
Okay.
So I know how difficult it is to get rid of unproductive labor. Having said that, these are kind of extraordinary circumstances, and a government shutdown might be used creatively by Trump supporters within the deep state as it is to get rid of some of the parasites.
Well, here's the issue. First of all, the government shutdown is now over. We may have another one in 3 weeks' time. And just because the government is shut down doesn't mean that the rules have stopped applying. The rules and laws are still the rules and laws. In order to just sweepingly fire a bunch of people, Trump would have to declare literally a national emergency and suspend all the labor rules and so forth. And I don't think that would be a wise and prudent thing to do.
I agree. Unfortunately, it calls to mind that ludicrous comment made by Senator appropriately named Jeff Flake, comparing Trump to Stalin. And I don't think we've seen the bad Trump yet. We've seen a blustering guy who's kind of clownish, but underneath that clownish exterior, I really think we've got a man of steel. At least I hope we do. And I'm thinking that he might privately let some of the people down the chain of command know that, hey, especially Flake, you want to see Stalin? I'll show you Stalin. I think Trump could probably pull this off.
Well, I disagree, because Stalin was surrounded by people who thought the same way that he did. That's why he was able to do what he did. Same thing with Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler could not have done everything all by himself. He had to be surrounded by people who agreed with him, agreed with the agenda, agreed with the philosophy, and were willing to do what the Fuhrer said. Trump doesn't have that. He is surrounded by enemies, much like John F. Kennedy was. And he's meeting bureaucratic resistance on virtually everything. I'm in agreement with you. He needs to put on his president.
I mean, if you know the background that led up to conversion of a large tract of Baltic swampland into a functional ocean port, he really had to clean house, and he was considered one of Russia's enlightened rulers. Trump could do it. I believe Trump could do it if he really wanted to, but whether he has the willpower to do it or not remains to be seen. Anyway, that's just off the top of my head, and I'd be interested to see if there's any concurrence by folks in the listening audience. I'll let you go. Listen, I love your sword, but aren't you afraid that Conan is going to come and repossess it?
No, I don't think so. First of all, this one's just a wall decoration. And second, I actually worked on the original movie briefly, so I feel I have a right to a souvenir. Okay?
Okay. All right, Mike. Thanks.
All right, thanks an awful lot. And before we take our next call, I think pretty much everybody listening to the show is going to be in agreement. The government is bloated. It's feather-bedded. It's full of nepets. And, of course, managers in government love to have larger staffs because it makes them look more important. And so government unrestrained grows like a cancer, and this one really has. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates just now rejoining the network. We're going to go back to the phones here. Charlie in Los Angeles, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, government employees. You do remember the postal shootings?
Oh, yes.
Okay. They abruptly stopped because they basically came in and said you can't fire people anymore. Most of those shootings were revenge shootings, politics in the upper management, deciding who's going to get fired and who's not. So if you want to know why you pretty much, once you're in the government after 7 or 8 years, it's almost impossible to get fired. Trump can't fire anybody no matter what you think he can do. It's because of the postal shootings. Nobody locks and loads faster than a government worker expecting his pension and then getting fired. Okay, thank you for taking my call.
Okay, well, that's an interesting way of putting it. I think the process of immunizing government workers from being fired was actually much more drawn out and had multiple sources. The postal shootings, what I was hearing was the post office had brought in a bunch of efficiency experts who were just micromanaging these workers, telling them how to turn the wrist when they put the mail in the mailbox, trying to squeeze an extra second out of them. And it's like in college psych, when you put the rats in the maze and the maze doesn't have a solution, they'll go crazy. And I think that was also part of what was going on back then. All right, so the phone lines are open if you want to call on in. Now, out in California, actually it's all over the West Coast now, one of the earliest burger chains was called In-N-Out Burger, and it's actually turning out to be an interesting place to work because employees can work their way up to $160,000 a year with no degree or previous experience. Now, many years ago, my younger brother worked briefly for In-N-Out at the corporate office. And he said it was a wonderful place to work. It just had this amazing, friendly feel. Everybody was family. I don't know if it's still that way, but it was back when my brother was there as well. And that, I think, embodies what Henry Ford was saying. The best way to become prosperous is to make those around you prosper, because it's a very successful company. Now, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is apparently moving forward without the United States, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and 11 countries, they're starting to work on a new Asia-Pacific Trade Pact, and apparently they're going to hold the signing ceremony in Chile in March. So they've revised the trade agreement without the United States. We'll see what happens on that. Not everybody has benefited from the new tax plan. In fact, Johnson & Johnson posted a rare quarterly loss, a whopping $10 billion with a B, due to a $13 billion charge related to the recent U.S. tax overhaul. And the healthcare giant on Tuesday also reported sharply higher spending on production, marketing, administration, and research, offsetting a big jump in sales. Now, the United States is starting to put America First tariffs on imported products, and the first two are going to be on washing machines and solar panels. And yes, it means these products are going to be more expensive, but if we're ever going to bring our own manufacturing back and give it the opportunity to start matching the quality of these imported machines, we need to support them. And we need to reverse that trade imbalance. We need the money flowing into the country, not out. Now, China and South Korea, whose manufacturers will be most heavily affected, have criticized the move. This could be the opening salvo in the trade war that has been talked about between the United States and China. Over in the European Union, Germany's biggest newspaper, Bild, reported it's seen paperwork indicating a shortfall of millions of euros in the EU pension fund. Now, this EU pension fund is not for the citizens of the EU. It's for the members of the European Parliament. Some government people in the Brussels government. And apparently they're taking out a lot of money. Not enough is coming in. So they're going to have the taxpayers pitch on in to basically provide the pensions for these Eurocrats who they don't particularly like. That, I imagine, will sting. Down in France, French President Emmanuel Macron has admitted that had there been a French independence referendum, the majority of the French people would have voted to leave the European Union. So I'm sure he's wiping his brow and saying, thank goodness we didn't allow them to have an actual vote. We can't trust the people to think these things through. You seeing this attitude that's coming out? Like that congressman who came on out and said they can't release the FISA memo because the American people are too stupid to understand it. What an arrogant piece of work that is. Austria is now suing the European Commission in Hungary regarding a nuclear power station in Hungary. And apparently the European Commission decided to let Hungary expand its Pax atomic plant. And Austria, which shares a border with Hungary and is downwind, prides itself on supporting clean energy, does not have any nuclear plants of its own. So further stresses on the European Union, further strains here. Over in Israel, Israel looks set to win its war on African refugees, and that's actually what the headline in Electronic Intifada said. And it's kind of interesting for two reasons. First of all, for a while, to deal with the demographic problem, Israel was welcoming the Ethiopian Jews to come to Israel to build up the population numbers and keep the Jews in the majority. Now, apparently, they've changed their mind, and they're sending them back, and they've basically issued a warning to the African refugees. They have 90 days to leave the country or be thrown in jail indefinitely. And what's really kind of interesting here is Israel's at the forefront of demanding that Europe let the refugees in, that the United States let the refugees in. It's fine for every other country on earth. You should let the refugees in. But when it comes to Israel, different set of rules. But the government of Israel has run into a little bit of a problem because at least 3 pilots for Israel's flag carrier are flatly refusing to take part in the forced deportation of refugees, saying, I won't fly refugees to their deaths. These are El Al pilots resisting the deportation. Now, Russia and China are now willing to start building small nuclear reactors in Iran. The deputy head of the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, Mohammad Ahmadiyyan, announced that China and Russia have voiced enthusiasm for the construction of small nuclear reactors in Iran. I guess these would be used for regional power stations in low-demand areas. And apparently, Iran has been studying small reactor technology. So that's moving forward, more business, more commerce. Now, here's an interesting story. Apparently, China has overtaken the U.S. in scientific output. And the U.S. likes to claim it's still the world leader in science and technology. Can't even build our own rocket engines yet here. But apparently, China has overtaken the U.S. in terms of the volume of total scientific papers published. And that is a very telling statistic that underscores the rapid strides in Chinese scientific achievement. I think China has either 2 or 3 space program. Now, Floridians will be voting on an issue that will restore voting rights to 1.5 million felons. It's going to be an initiative for the November, including parole or probation. Those convicted of murder or sexual offenses will continue to be barred from voting. Now, new research. Oh, it's time for a commercial break. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. The phone lines are open, as the announcer said, 800-313-9443. Okay, the carbon Nazis are still out there trying to rescue their human-caused global warming, rebranded to climate change, rebranded to climate crisis. And one thing they like to point to are places where glaciers are melting. See, we still have snow and ice. The temperature seems to be dropping pretty much all over the globe. The sea levels are not rising, and all they've got left are melting glaciers. And it turns out they may be about to lose that as well, because over on the seaward side of Greenland, it's well known the glaciers there are melting. And the carbon Nazis will point at it and say, see, human-caused global warming. You're to blame for that. But new research says that what's going on is heat from the Earth's interior is responsible for the acceleration of the loss of the glaciers on Greenland's seaward side. The fact that it's happening only on one side is very interior of the Earth that made it look kind of like an onion, where there was the little core and then there was the mantle. And then there was the crust, and it all looked very nice and uniform. But it's becoming understood that the near crust part of the interior of the Earth is not smooth and featureless, that it has all kinds of bumps called hotspots. And some of them are responsible for some volcanoes. Most volcanoes are subduction zone volcanoes. But the Yellowstone supervolcano is a hotspot volcano. And the Hawaiian Islands were formed from a hotspot volcano. As the tectonic plate slides over the heat plume, new volcanoes keep popping up in a line. And it's now being understood that there are, in fact, smaller of these heat plumes inside the mantle. And the ground above them is just naturally warmer. And it's got nothing to do with human activity. In other words, it's not your fault. All right. Let's talk a little bit about computers. A little bit of a warning. Apparently, wireless charging and fast charging your cell phone batteries could actually cause them to wear out much quicker. Now, this article is specific to the iPhone 10 and the iPhone 8, and that is a concern because it's very difficult to replace the battery. I remember when Claire had that Samsung, and I got her a wireless charging pad. And now that I look back on it, we went through a bunch of batteries, which for the Samsung is no big deal. Order the battery on eBay, pop off the back of the phone, put the new battery in, everybody's happy. But apparently that is an issue, that you can wear your batteries out much faster with fast charging and wireless charging. So for those of you with phones that are difficult, if not impossible, to replace the batteries, you might want to think about that. Let's get on back here to Spectre and Meltdown. Even Microsoft has said, don't install the new patches. Apparently, they've caused all kinds of problems, machines constantly rebooting, machines being bricked. It's a huge amount of devastation out there. And at this point, I have turned off the updates on all my machines. I'm just scared. I'm more scared of Microsoft patches than I am of cyber criminals right now. Linus Torvalds declares the Intel fix for Meltdown Spectre complete and utter garbage. Now, Linus, of course, is known for his continuing work on the innermost code of Linux systems, and he's just come out very harsh with his comments about Intel and uses a lot of profanity. In fact, he's using words I can't say on this here radio without risking the license of our on-air affiliates. But it is an epic disaster when you really think about it. You find out these Intel chips, ever since the Centrino, which, if I recall correctly, was the first of the Intel chips to be fabricated in Israel. I'm sure that's got nothing to do with it. I'm absolutely sure it's got nothing to do with it. But every chip since the Centrino has this flaw, this bug, this back door sitting right in the metal of the CPU. And it's been there for all these years, able to be used by whoever knows about it and knows it's there, which could be the Mossad or the NSA or who knows who. They're sharing a lot of information back and forth. So now a student discovers this problem and makes it public. And Intel scrambles to get a patch out, and the patch turns out to be wrecking system. First of all, they're admitting up front, by putting in this patch to disable this speculative processing facility, which is the root of the problem, it's going to slow your computers down. If you're running numerically intensive software, it could slow down by as much as 30%. That's 1/3. More about this when we come on back. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we're talking about this epic disaster for computer users. And it's all computer users, home computer users, small businesses, large corporations, anybody using those Intel chips, they're even in our cell phones and tablets, is affected by this. And you either go on living with the awareness that your device is not secure, or you put in the patch, and at the very least, your device is going to slow down. And that speed of your device, that's part of what you paid for when you upgraded. I want a faster machine. Remember the trouble that Apple got in when it was discovered they were intentionally slowing down older iPhones. People love speed. And now they're going to have to give that up. Then it turns out, of course, that the patches are causing problems. Machines are continually rebooting. Some have been bricked, meaning they're a doorstop from that point on. There's no way to get them back. I think there needs to be some major class action lawsuits against Intel by everybody who's ever used Intel product, and that is pretty much the entire population of the United States of America. And we need to get to the heart of just how this back door got into all these chips. Whose back door is it? Because I don't think it's a simple bug, because it's hit virtually every chip Intel has put out since the Centrino. And that, to me, suggests design. All right, we're going to take some phone calls here. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Mike, with the exception of... Oh, thank you. Hello. Okay. Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut off your greeting. With the exception of dark brown skin, there is precious little similarity between Ethiopian Jews who make Aiea and immigrate legally to Israel and the Somalis who are inundating Europe. Ethiopian Jewry is an ancient recognized sect, and Ethiopian Jews have had the right and been going to Israel for a very long time. Most are, go ahead and get their citizenship quite legally, and they're not causing a lot of crime problems or rapes or female genital mutilation or anything like that. It just seems weird to compare. And if Israel wants to get rid of them, and they're threatening them with jail, if they were to call Israel's bluff on the matter and allow themselves to be jailed, that would, potentially, get Israel in great, very bad trouble with world opinion and the United Nations, though they tend to disregard and scoff at United Nations pronouncements. I really don't, but who knows, with the Saudis at the head of the Human Rights, Commission there, the UN, who knows what response they might get before the UN. So it's all a very muddy matter. But I can actually see them calling Israel's bluff on this.
Well, first of all, to be clear, and I may not have been as clear when I was doing the story, the Ethiopian Jews, I think, are exempted from this order. This 90 days get out or else is directed at non-Jewish African refugees who've been pouring into Israel as they have into all the other countries in the region. But it's still, it's forced deportation, it's ethnic cleansing, and it's already looking bad in the eyes of the world.
Right, exactly. That's the problem with those doggone walls. The airplanes have a tendency to fly right over them.
I'm sorry, would you say that again?
I said that's the problem with those doggone walls. The airplanes have a tendency to fly right over them. And, bringing people.
Yes.
Yes, I know what you're saying. The refugees have been getting in. Well, Israel's a country with a wall. everybody always says, sure, won't work. Look at Israel's wall. The first thing they point to.
Well,
wall,
Israel's wall is only along its eastern side to wall off Palestine. Israel is still perfectly open to the ocean, and you're absolutely right. The wall does not prevent aviation from getting in to the airports.
Right, exactly. So that's another sticky wicket. But I mean, it'll also be interesting to see what the responses are, because if we're talking about illegal immigrants who've crossed in illegally, the same as here or in Europe, then that certainly changes the complexion of the matter.
Well, you need to remember, to the open borders people, refugee and illegal immigrant are not the same thing. And by declaring them all refugees, it makes it okay for them to walk into other countries, even though the other country may have a different idea about it. In the case of the United States, we're not calling the people from Mexico refugees, at least not yet. They may try and do that at some point. But it is a very complex, muddy issue.
Right. And given the history of Ethiopia, when Haile Selassie used to let shiploads of grain rot at the docks and not distribute it, they have very more historical claim to, being refugees from oppression than some of the others. But anyway. All right, Mike. Well, thank you.
All right. Well, thanks an awful lot here. The idea is the open borders people are trying to play it on up that these people are fleeing oppression. They're fleeing all the wars that the United States has started. Actually, that's only about 10% of them. They've been doing all kinds of studies, and they're finding out 90% of these refugees are taking advantage of the open borders to go someplace where they think, or they've been told, they'll have better economic opportunities. That is not acting out. It's not working out, rather, and that's what's leading to the resentment and the anger and the frustration, which in turn is leading to the crime and rape and violence all over Europe. We're going to go back to the phones here. Tom in Indiana, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Would like to wake up the editorial cartoonists out there to, instead of the stars and bars with 5-pointed stars, if they made them 6-pointed stars and made a picture of that, I think that ought to be the new Jewish flag out there.
Yeah, it could very well be. I mean, I've seen variations on the theme, on that very theme for a long time. And, just even in the news banners on certain news stories where, like on election night, there was a big stink because one of the networks, it had all of our traditional 5-pointed stars, and then in the background there were a couple of 6-pointed stars, just getting that message out there. And a lot of people were very upset with that.
Well, I think it'd be a good political cartoon for somebody to start drawing that. Anyway, aloha. Appreciate your program.
Aloha. Thank you very much for the phone call. Our phone lines are open again, 800-313-9443. So let's get on back to this issue about Spectre and Meltdown, because this is, I don't have words to say how bad this is. And however much damage is being caused, you can count on the corporate media to not want to report that. How many people have had their computers shut down or rebooting, or how many people have been hit by this. Because after all, Microsoft is a wonderful advertiser and we can't annoy them. But I wish somebody would do a head count. How many people have been adversely affected by this? Certainly everybody who's downloaded that first round of patches has been adversely affected. Their machines are now slower, if they're still working at all. We're looking at millions and millions of device users being hit by this. Nobody seems upset about it, at least in the corporate media or in the government. Well, it's just one of those things. Remember, in that end user license agreement that you signed or you accepted when you opened the software, you can't sue us for anything that we do that's bad. You know what? I think we ought to use this episode to bring back product liability to the computer, hardware, and software industries. Now, in the early days of the computer industry, the days of the Apple II and the Commodore VIC-20, which I still have a working one up here on the shelf, These computer companies went to the government and they wanted to be indemnified against product liability because they were a brand new industry. They were very small. They were just growing, and they didn't want to be basically killed at birth by a bad mistake. And so the government went along and said, while you get your feet under you, you're protected from civil liability. And it was written into all the end user license agreements. Well, that was a long time ago. And computer hardware and software are multi-billion-dollar businesses. And there's no legitimate reason for them to be shielded from product liability. And by shielding them from product liability, you lead to incidents like what we're seeing here. Somebody, if this was not intentional, somebody got sloppy. Somebody just didn't care. This issue has been in every single processor since the Centrino. We need product liability restored so that these corporations will now have an incentive to produce more reliable product. Don't just make it pretty. Don't just change the interface. Actually make it work better for us. I'm opposed to indemnification of the vaccine industry. That's why they've gotten so reckless with their adjuvants, and they're making so many mistakes. They can't get sued for it. That's not a healthy way to run an economy. Yeah, I think this Intel chip issue is a good one to use to call for the ending or the restoration of product liability to this industry. Because there's a heck of a class action lawsuit waiting for Intel. Okay, yes, Intel, which people are now calling Chipzilla, has now officially said do not install the patch they sent out for this flaw. Apparently, it has taken down a huge number of machines. I don't know about you. I'm angry about this. I'm angry, first of all, that it happened or was done. Second, that it went on for so many years until somebody outside Intel discovered it and made it public. And their attitude is, oh, well, we'll just send you a patch. Everything will be better. No, it won't. You're losing computer power. You're losing speed. You might lose your machine. Very cavalier attitude toward the consumer these days. We need to make these companies afraid of the consumer. I remember in the good old days, the motto was, the customer is always right. These days, it almost seems like the attitude is, the customer will be happy with what we decide to sell them. Now, if you play Blizzard, apparently there's been a flaw found in all the Blizzard games that could let hackers hijack millions of PCs. And apparently this includes World of Warcraft, I've heard of that one, Overwatch, Diablo 3, Hearthstone, StarCraft. These are all games created by Blizzard Entertainment, and apparently all of them have this problem. So when you're playing these games, you play them online using web browsers. You install a game client application called Blizzard Update Agent. And this basically communicates with Blizzard, but apparently this Blizzard Update Agent is vulnerable to a hacking technique called DNS rebinding that allows any website to act as a bridge between the external server and your local host. In other words, it gets around your firewall. Now, everybody's making a big deal about cryptocurrencies. Oh, they're up there, they're soaring, they're up, they're down, they're all around, and everybody's still talking about it. And there was concern raised that most of the Bitcoins seem to be in the hands of a very, very few people, just like US dollars. But apparently, according to this story over in Bloomberg International, apparently hackers have walked off with about 14% of the big digital currencies. And a large part of that is hijacking your machine to do cryptocurrency mining. So they're just being greedy out there. Now, we've talked about this next issue before, but apparently it's coming back, so we're going to mention it. Hackers are flooding the internet with more fake domain names, and they're taking advantage of something called the internationalized domain names, which are allowed to use characters from other languages. And they can use something from the Greek alphabet, for example, that looks kind of like an O, and use it to put it into a domain name that looks just like a real domain. Then they send out a DNS hack to direct people to the fake website. And they make the website look like the real one, and just glancing at that bar at the top, it looks like it's the right domain. But you're in the playpen of the cyber criminals. Now, I know on Chrome, there is actually a plugin that you can get that will block internationalized domain names. In other words, if you enter a domain, or if you're directed to a domain that is not written entirely in English, it will block you. And I wish I could remember what it was called. Let's see. IDN Safe, that's what it's called. So you might want to look on that. And for those of you who are using other browsers, you might also look for something else that is similar to that. Because isn't it amazing how totally Wild West the internet has become? With all the cyber criminals and the scammers, and it's a one-sided wild, wild west. You're being shot at constantly. You're not allowed to shoot back. Where's the fun in that? Well, when we get back from this next commercial break, there's some shooting back going on. It's starting. It's a pushback on this whole net neutrality issue. So please join us on the air again, 800-313-9443. And we're going to be, there's a lot of lawsuits, and even a state that are now pushing to regain net neutrality. We'll be talking about that after these words from our sponsors. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get into net neutrality, I just got an email from a listener. Have you heard the argument that no software may be patented, trademarked, or even copyrighted because of the exemption against protecting any mathematical formula? All programs are algorithms. Algorithms are math. Ergo, no copyright protection allowed. I'm aware of the prohibition against copyrighting a mathematical formula, but there's a lot more in software than just the mathematics. There's the logic structure. You can copyright that. There's the internal graphics. You can copyright that. Remember, Microsoft for a while was doing what were called look and feel lawsuits, where people who were writing their own versions of Office, for example, and they weren't using any of the Microsoft code, Microsoft was still suing them, saying, well, it kind of looks like what we're doing. And it went back and forth. I mean, obviously, you can't patent the idea of a word processor. They've been around for a very, very long time. But basically, Microsoft wasn't interested in winning the lawsuits, but just bankrupting these companies with legal costs. It's called lawfare. Now, getting on back to net neutrality, we're coming up on the showdown. As you know already, 21 or 22, I keep seeing both numbers, states' attorneys generals are suing the Federal Communications Commission over their rollback on the net neutrality rules. Mozilla has joined that, well, they filed their own lawsuit to protect net neutrality. In fact, there is a whole flood of these lawsuits heading on in to basically say common carrier has to apply to the internet. This is not a hobby. This is now a critical part of the nation's infrastructure, and it should not be hijacked by a few large corporations. Now, over in Montana, their governor is taking a stand for net neutrality. And basically, the governor, Steve Bullock, has said Montana will sign contracts only with internet service providers that honor net neutrality. In other words, Don't even think about doing any kind of ISP business in Montana if you're going to go along with giving the rich guys the preferential treatment. So, now, this story actually made it to Fox News just now. It's about that Hawaii missile alert that we all went through a little over a week ago. And they're trying to explain away why it took so long to get the word out that it was a false alarm. There was that 38-minute delay before it went out over the emergency management system, which they blamed on FEMA, and FEMA said wasn't our fault. And there was the issue about, why didn't you put it out on Twitter? The governor has a Twitter account. A lot of people are following it. Why didn't he do that? And he didn't get it onto Twitter for something like over 20 minutes after it happened. His excuse is he temporarily forgot his Twitter password. I'm not kidding. That's the new official story. More about that when we come back in hour 3. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And the phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we're talking about the latest wrinkle in the story about our false alarm missile alert a little over a week ago. And the story just is not adding up. The official story remains: somebody pushed the wrong menu item on a software interface, and this message about an incoming missile attack was broadcast to every cellular phone and television in the state. It did cover the entire state. And then it was 38 minutes before the same system was used to send out an alert that it was a false alarm. Should have been sent immediately, could have been sent immediately. And Governor Ige and the head of the Emergency Management Agency are trying to basically explain why it took so long for the word to get on out. And initially they were blaming FEMA, saying they were waiting for FEMA's permission to put out this, to cancel the alert. And FEMA said, no, you don't need our permission. If you've sent something out in mistake, obviously you are allowed to correct that as fast as you can. Then the other issue was raised is why the governor's Twitter account didn't put it on out, because obviously he's the governor and a lot of people follow him on Twitter. And his excuse today, and they even had it on Fox News, he forgot his Twitter password. Now, I am not buying any of this at this point. I'm also not buying the claim that there really was a missile of some kind out there. I think, and this is because they had a similar incident in Japan just a couple of days later, I think it was actually a test. I think they deliberately put out this alert just to see how everybody was going to react. They were probably up there at that police command center where all the TV cameras come on in, and they were just watching to see how bad the panic would be. And by the way, it wasn't all that bad. A lot of people just didn't know what to do. They just said, I don't know where the missile's going to hit. I don't know what direction to go on. I think that's what it was, and that's why it took so long for the retraction. They were waiting to see what people were going to do. Now, hopefully that's being done for civil defense and for training, or worst case, they are planning a false flag of some kind. Pearl Harbor, the sequel. There's been another incident with a Tesla Model S rear-ended a fire truck parked on a freeway. This was in Culver City, and apparently the Tesla car doing 65, the speed limit, hit a parked fire truck, and the firefighters were there attending to a freeway accident. And for the driver's blaming the autopilot. It was on autopilot mode. And for some reason, the Tesla software, it's able to track cars around it that are traveling at nearly the same speed, but apparently somehow missed the fire truck. Now, I saw the photo of this, and the fire truck was parked at an angle. So if the Tesla's forward obstacle is based on radar, it probably bounced off those angled panels, and that may be the reason that the accident actually happened. The fire truck only got minor damage. The front of the Tesla was toast. It's just toast. And I like the idea, but obviously there are still issues with these devices. All right, let's talk about Earth science now, because there's a lot going on. I mean, the same day that we had that fake missile alert here in Hawaii, that night there was a big quake in Peru, and possible tsunami for that. And as you know, last night, middle of the night, 7.9 quake up just off the coast of Alaska. Tsunami warnings all over there. Tsunami alert here in Hawaii. And now apparently Mount Mayon in the Philippines has exploded, and it's sending a huge plume of ash and steam into the sky. I saw a video of this. Authorities have raised the alert level to 4 out of 5, meaning a potentially deadly major eruption is possible in the next few days. And apparently Mayon is the most active volcano in all of the Philippines. So the Earth is really getting her rocks off these days, isn't it? Okay. Here's a bizarre wrinkle in the abortion debate. Apparently there is a religious group called the Satanic Temple, and they have decided to support a woman identified as Mary Doe, and she is challenging the state's informed consent law, which requires women seeking an abortion to wait 72 hours first to consider it. And she is claiming that waiting 72 hours before having the abortion somehow or other violates her religious beliefs. Now, maybe she's part of the Satanic Temple, and that's part of their religious beliefs, but this is going to go to court in Missouri. And we'll see what happens with that. I remember when I was still living in Southern California working in the film industry, a lot of weird religions out there. It was the early days of Scientology. There was another group called the Temple of Set. Seemed like the Order of the Ram was another one. Every corner you turn, there was another storefront religious offering. Vermont has just become the 9th state to legalize recreational marijuana. The legislature voted it through. The governor signed it into law. So now I know where my family's going to be going on their weekends, just across that border from New Hampshire. Congress is quietly pushing a bill to require a national biometric ID for all Americans. I think this is a bad idea because biometrics are not reliable. We know that fingerprints can be faked. We know that even the facial scanner on the iPhone X can be hacked. One of the problems I have with DNA testing is the fact they don't actually match the entire 3 billion molecules, 3 billion rungs of the DNA molecule. It's basically a test that categorizes it on the basis of, I think it's 13 different measurements. And it is actually possible for 2 people to have the same 13 indicators. It's remote, but it's not impossible. The only reason the government wants us to have IDs is so they can keep track of us. It's like ranchers branding the cattle. You're mine now. Shh. Got to leave my mark on you. Over in Pennsylvania, scientists have discovered that radioactivity from oil and gas wastewater is now being found in stream sediments. Now, this gets back to the fracking and how dangerous it is for the environment. The promise was that all of this toxic fracking fluid and all of that industrial waste that was being contracted to dispose of was going to be buried way down deep in the earth where it would stay, except it doesn't. What does fracking do to the rock around it? It cracks it. It opens up paths for these toxic chemicals to travel, and they're under tremendous pressure. Where are they going to go? Out and up. And yes, some of the materials used or disposed of in these fracking wells are radioactive. We're seeing it's amazing to see Al Gore out there making a big deal about carbon dioxide, and nobody's paying attention to the radiation coming out of Fukushima, or the toxic materials coming out of the fracking wells, or the fact that the oil from the Gulf oil disaster didn't really go away. It's still there, just on the bottom where you can't see it. But carbon dioxide is the villain. So let's look at all the illnesses we're dealing with. There's the Aussie flu, the Japanese flu, the French flu. CDC says there are other strains that are getting ready to pop up there. There's that bleeding eye disease in Uganda, which they've identified as being pretty much the same one that wiped out the Aztecs. And apparently in North America, deer are starting to die from a disease that attacks their nervous system, gradually destroying it. Sounds kind of like a bovine spongiform epithopathy or mad cow disease. This could be made the same. The scientists' concern, though, is that it may be transmissible to humans. You know, that might explain another story that we had down here. Apparently, some liberals took that same cognitive test as Donald Trump. Remember, he scored 100%, and these liberal reporters took the same test and they failed. I think they have been eating the king's deer. Okay. I'm looking at the headlines that are just coming in. You have to... Debbie Wasserman Schultz is another one eating the king's deer here. Apparently she was on CNN, and she actually came out with a statement that the Democrats shut down the government for momentum. She said this yesterday. This ranks on a par with we have to vote it through before we can see what's in it. We shut down the government for momentum. Even the CNN host couldn't let her get away with that. I imagine Debbie Wasserman Schultz is very nervous about all these new investigations into the investigations, because she's right in the middle well, she's in the middle of the Russian dossier. She was running the DNC at the time the DNC was paying Fusion GPS to pay Christopher Steele to come up with all of this nonsense. Anyway, I need some phone calls here to finish out the hour. 800-313-9443. Now, Catherine Herridge is out there saying that newly disclosed text messages from Peter Strzok prove that James Comey and Loretta Lynch lied to Congress. Now, the interesting thing is going to be, will Congress do something about it? Because lying under oath is perjury. It's chargeable. Story coming out of an Investment Watch blog. To nobody's surprise, trust in the U.S. government and the media falls at record-breaking pace. Apparently, the Edelman Foundation's annual report basically indicates the largest ever single-year drop in trust among Americans for those institutions. Apparently, the FBI Secret Society is #1 on Twitter. It's trending up there. Let's see. I thought somebody had sent me the information on the plugin for the to block the internationalized sites here. The lady who was the inspiration for the Rosie the Riveter poster apparently passed away. She was 96 years old. And again, let's talk about this immigration thing. This is building up to be an actual conflict in the streets. And apparently the DACA recipients, who are still wondering what's going to happen to them, tried to have a protest by blocking the entrance to Disneyland. And apparently Disney security basically gave them what for. But what it comes down to is this. There's only so much in this country in terms of available food, available water, available infrastructure. You can't just keep pouring more and more people into a location if you're not expanding the infrastructure. We're actually going through that a little bit here in Hawaii. Now, our population growth peaked last year. It's actually going back down now. But our roads have not been widened to handle the increased traffic. When Claire and I first moved here, it was reasonable drive anywhere you wanted to go on the island, very pleasant. Now it's constant gridlock and traffic jams, and the Department of Transportation has said officially, Hawaii has the worst roads in the country. Now, obviously, they're hoping that when the light rail is finished at some far-off point in the future, that more and more people will be persuaded to leave their cars and use the light rail system. I don't know if that's really going to happen. The light rail system basically supports tourism venues, and we don't live in tourism venues, and it links Honolulu with Kapolei, which was set up to try and ease some of the population density and burden of Honolulu. But it's been a very long drive out on the H1. Again, the H1 wasn't expanded. The traffic congestion got worse. They added the zipper lane, which is kind of a weird thing to see. The center barricade actually slides back and forth. So during the morning, the townbound lanes have an extra lane. During the afternoon, the outbound lanes have the extra lane here. Apparently, MSNBC's Joy Reid was interviewing Evan Siegfried, who's a never-Trumper, and he used the term illegal alien, and she scolds him. Now, it's a perfectly acceptable word. Now, the pro-immigration people want you to use undocumented worker because that sounds gentler. They don't want to get the word illegal in there. They're simply undocumented. No, they're an illegal alien. The instant they set foot across that border, they are committing a crime. Apparently, another person over at MSNBC said President Trump is an enemy to non-white people in America. That's funny. Yesterday they were claiming he was an anti-Irish bigot. No wonder. Trust in the media is plummeting. Okay, we actually have a caller, Dennis in Indiana. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I was just thinking, wouldn't it be neat if Donald Trump would just let Jeff Sessions go and let Judge Janine Pirro be the Attorney General or the Department of Justice ahead of that and get some things done, and maybe that would work out that way.
I would love for Sessions to be fired because I don't think, he's going after the marijuana users, but he's not going after the deep state. I'd like to see Larry Klayman in there, or Tom Fitton, or Alan Fabish as Attorney General.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, see, I'm not familiar with all those names, but, I know I listen to this station quite a bit, and then when I'm able to, I do watch Fox News, and I do like Saturday night listening to Janine Pirro, and Handy. So,
well, basically, the names I named all go back to Judicial Watch. Judicial Watch was founded by Larry Klayman. He has now left and founded a new called Freedom Watch. Down in Florida, I think it is. And Tom Fitton has taken over as the head of Judicial Watch. Alan Fabish used to work with Larry Klayman at Judicial Watch. We became friends over the Vince Foster affair. Alan Fabish is the guy who took the Freedom of Information Act lawsuit for the crime scene photos all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled against releasing the crime scene photos, saying that dead people have a right to privacy. Now, at issue was the paperwork that surfaced indicating there was a second gunshot wound to Vincent Foster's body, which would obviously totally undermine the claim that he killed himself, although there was a lot of other stuff that undermined it. The gun had been wiped clean, and I'm pretty sure it wasn't Vince Foster who was wiping it clean after it was used.
Yeah. Why would he? I mean, why would he? Anyway,
No, he wouldn't be able to, because after the gun was used, he was dead.
Right, he would be able
Okay.
to. Right.
And
that's why I say, why would he? They knew what he did. That's what he did.
And then they call in the FBI to basically do what the FBI apparently does: distorts the evidence, covers things up. What really first caught my eye was the silver black gun issue, where the original Robert Fisk report on the death of Vince Foster said that Lisa Foster had identified the gun found with the body. And she was actually shown a completely different gun by the FBI. Dennis, we got to take a break for commercials.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after these few words. 800-313-9443. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Breaking news just coming on in. Apparently, FBI Director Christopher Wray's chief of staff, who was also chief of staff for former director James Comey, is leaving the FBI. This may have been what was actually behind that earlier thing about the FBI director threatening to quit if McGabe was removed. But it turns out it's James Rybicki, and he's been under increased scrutiny from GOP lawmakers, and he's decided that he's going to leave to take up an opportunity in the private sector. Now, this sounds to me like he wants to get away from the rising heat. So, coming out of the investigation of the investigation. Because obviously, as the chief of staff, he was right there in the heart, saw everything Comey was doing in terms of getting ready to exonerate Hillary Clinton, do a get out of jail free card. And there we go. Now, so he may be saying, with all the investigations cranking up and looking to turn real, he may have decided he wants to get on out. And we may see more of these in the future. Okay. All right, so we did, all right. Just having words with my control room technician. Okay, now, breaking financial news. Apparently, Michigan and New Jersey are filing bills to establish state public banks. Now, this is following the North Dakota model, where North Dakota basically set up a bank whose job it is not to necessarily make huge amounts of money out of the population, but to simply pool together available money and make it available for needed projects, business investment, infrastructure projects. It worked very well in North Dakota. A lot of people are saying state private banks or state public banks are the way to go. They are not predatory like private central banks. And I can imagine that the Federal Reserve is going to be very, very upset about this and try and find a way to block it. Because the private central bank doesn't want to let go of you. They own you, as George Carlin used to say, and they are not ready to give you up. Okay, let's take a phone call. Jeff in Georgia. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you doing? It's good to talk to you. I'd called Rick Adams on Saturday, and we were talking some Kennedy, but the banking system, this fraudulent fractional banking system, is why we have an oligarchy ruling over us today. And I'm puzzled why people that have voices like you, like Rick, and like others cannot get together and do something to overthrow this system. Of course, nonviolently, of course, but overthrow this banking system, because they're loaning money to governments that they don't have. And I believe much of the $20 trillion can actually be canceled without hurting the middle class too much. And it would do, and not only in this country, but in Mexico, Latin America, Canada, and Western Europe, and maybe other places. It's all over the place, and it's the reason that you have 1% ruling over the 99. It's the reason Europe's getting overrun by immigration against the will of blue-collar people. It's happening here. Yes, we want to help all them people, but the power is not in the hands of the people now because of the banking system. And I see them going after our free speech. Our forefathers said this is this This is a human right. This is a God-given right to free speech. And they're stuffing that out of Europe. We need to be spreading free speech around the world, and we need to be working to overthrow this banking system, because the power will move back from the 1% to the rest of us. You know, I live in a place, I see these young people that they're going into the Barbaritos and these 7-Elevens, and they're shooting the attendants that work there. These are blue-collar people that are working. And every young person in this country, 17, 18, 25, 30, he should have a job. And the government should be the facilitator for that. Yes, try to use private enterprise, but the years before that, you had bankers, and you know this, bankers, they fund the Jacob Schiffs, the Warburg, and others. They funded the overthrow of the Tsar.
Yes.
Which led to the murder of, Solzhenitsyn claimed $66 million. You know, I don't know where he come up with his number, but you had gulag systems. You had mass murder.
Okay, Jeff.
And it should have been a learning.
Jeff, I'm going to put you on hold. Don't hang up. We got to do some commercials, and then I'm going to come back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Jeff in Georgia. And Jeff, before I let you go on, I want to back up and respond to some of the things you were saying. There is no question that banks love wars. They're able to charge very high interest on it because it's high risk. And wars are the bankers' richest harvest of debt. And so, you're always going to find a big bank pushing for war somewhere in the background. And it's not just because of the money. Sometimes it's to basically force more debt upon an entire population. See, the way the system works right now, the problem with private central banking is the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to the bank than actually exists. You owe them that dollar plus however many cents interest has accrued on it, but those cents don't exist, and that is the trap. That is the tool of enslavement. That interest, it's not about debt and debt payment, it's about enslavement, to basically give you this sense of an obligation to the bankers that you can never satisfy, and that gives them control over you. And so what will happen is people will borrow and borrow and borrow until they can't borrow anymore. They're struggling with the debt payments and the interest payments. And at that point, the Keynesian economists come on in and say, well, government will borrow to keep the system going, because there always has to be more borrowing or the system will collapse. So government will borrow and borrow on behalf of the taxpayers, and I might add, without their permission, until government reaches its maximum. And that's where this country is right now. And it's at that point the bankers will try and kick off a war, because war resets all the rules. And it allows governments to borrow huge amounts of money and condemn future generations to paying it off. I think Germany paid off their debt from World War I only about 10 years ago. So that's really what's driving this. Go ahead, Jeff.
And you know, it sounds like you know a lot about that, Mike. Okay, I just want to say this: if a government borrows $1 trillion, if it had 200 million taxpayers, that's $5,000 apiece. Okay, if a government printed money, you know, like John Kennedy did, and I truly believe, you know, I've studied Kennedy for years. And I know full well that John Kennedy was killed in a coup d'etat, and I know he was killed by a Jewish cartel. He was killed by WASP, and I'm ashamed I'm a WASP. But he was killed by WASP in Dallas, in D.C., in New Orleans that were part of that. There was Cubans, there was mafia, but the Jewish cartel was behind it all. It started with the it started with Dimona, but there could have been a banking side of it too, because
there was. Jeff, comment here. Okay, I know that TV and movies and history in school try and make it look like there's just one cause for events that happen, but that's not the real world. Generally, wars are started and assassinations happen because there is a group of entities who all have their own particular agenda, but their solution overlaps on the war or the assassination, and that's when it happens. Kennedy had angered a lot of people. Israel was angry with him because he was trying to block them from getting nuclear weapons. The Texas billionaires were angry with him over the oil depletion allowance. The CIA was angry with him over the Bay of Pigs and his threat to shatter the CIA. You had Richard Nixon, who was looking at a 24-year Kennedy dynasty in the White House before he could even think about running again. And the Federal Reserve was angry with Kennedy over his executive order that issued the United States notes. And organized crime was angry with Kennedy because they'd helped him steal the election, and then he turned around and made his brother attorney general and sicked him on the mafia.
Well, I was a kid when Kennedy was shot. You know, I barely remember the funeral, but you know, in 1969 we walked on the moon. John Kennedy had vision, and I've lived long enough. There has not been a president like him. You know, irregardless of his affairs, he was the best president in my lifetime by far. He was not a puppet to the puppet masters. His father taught him well, and his father, I think, was a great man. His father tried to prevent a war. His father was the ambassador to the court of St. James, and he was right there in the epicenter with Chamberlain. And Chamberlain said, and Joe Kennedy said, to James Forrestal, you may know this, that when Forrestal asked him what happened over there when you were there, and he said Chamberlain said that Roosevelt and the Jews have forced England and France into war, and Kennedy even blamed part of it on William, on the ambassador to France. Okay, but John Kennedy had two strikes against him because of his father when he entered the White House. But the same oligarchy is ruling us today that covered up the Kennedy coup d'etat. And I tell you, I can't stand for it.
Well, I'll tell you this.
I mean, there's bring down the banking system. We have to push free speech, and we have to employ millions of these youth, because you know we walked on the moon when I was a kid. I mean, it's really, really terrible to see what our country may become.
We're definitely a nation in decline. There's no question about it. All right, Jeff, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call. We got to move on here. And I would like to see the Federal Reserve go away. As long as they are generous donors to candidates for elected office. I don't think that's going to happen, because your average politician is going to sell their own mother for $1. I would like to see full employment for young people. But again, this nation as a whole has walked away from manufacturing that generates jobs. Agriculture has become automated, so those jobs aren't around anymore. And nobody wants to buy our GMO produce anyway, so even those companies are in trouble. All right, let's go ahead and take another phone call from Sherry in Texas. Aloha, Sherry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today? Sherry,
here
you are. There you are.
Can you hear me?
I hear you now.
Yes, I'm here. Okay. Well, your show kind of comes in and out for me, but your producer was nice enough to let me on so I could hear the rest of your show and not have it interrupted. These are challenging times. The thing is, I think that a lot of seniors can be helped by the youth that needs work. And I have someone working for me now who's driving me around. Her husband owns a cab company, and we've made this arrangement, and I've checked with my CPA, and it's all okay. She's getting extra money. I'm getting a ride because I gave my daughter has my car. You know, these things can work. If the youth will put there's a lot of good young people out there who are smart and need a break. And there's a lot of work that seniors need. And I was lucky enough to lock into one of these things. And about cars, is it against the law, would you say, this sounds stupid, but for a company to make a low-tech car for those who don't want all the bells and whistles and to be tracked every
No, it's
every
not
mile?
against the law. No, it's not against the law, as long as it meets all the safety requirements. For being on the road, you can do it. And there are companies that make cars like that, the street legal dune buggies, and it's not very practical. But I definitely, as Claire and I talk about getting a newer car, we don't want Wi-Fi, we don't want Bluetooth. All I want's a backup camera. That's a nice to have, but I don't want a bunch of distractions all over that dashboard where you're having to figure out, what's going on. I don't even want traction control. When we lost the Xterra and before we got the Honda, we had to rent a few cars, and I got to try them with the traction control because it always defaults to on. It gives me a weird feeling, like the car isn't exactly going where I thought I'd pointed it. The only one that really worked was this pickup truck. I think it was called a Canyon, and I actually liked that one.
Yeah. Well, I think there's, the more we can force the system to rethink their stance, which they are in other areas, the more of us, there's more of us than them, and the more that we can succeed, I think. And I'm glad to hear that that's a possibility, because some smart car company will come up with something that will cater to what the people really want and what they think is fair for them and doesn't violate their rights and their freedom, and they will take off like a rocket. I mean, as long as we keep it legal. If I go into Walmart and they won't take my credit card, or they won't take, well, I don't have a credit card. If they won't take my check or they won't take my cash, I'll walk out. I wasn't able to get a Visa, I think, at one of the stores because you have to have put it on a credit card or something. So I went and got it at somewhere else. And as long as there is a somewhere else, they'll cave, because there's really more of us than them.
Well, see, the problem is with automotive development, at least. First of all, if the government says put a tracking device in it, there'll be a tracking device in it, and you won't have any choice about that. But car manufacturers design the cars and figure out the line of models they're going to have based on these very intensive surveys of the car driving public. A lot of this takes place at car shows. Very often they'll literally hold an event where I even attended one once, where they had down at the Los Angeles Convention Center, and people were invited on in, and I can't even remember the car manufacturer. It was one of the American manufacturers, and what they had were called the concept cars. These are cars they're considering making, and they're basically done up as one-up prototypes, and they're drivable, and people could sit in them, people could look at them, and they're just measuring people's response. And unfortunately, the majority of people respond to lots of lights and lots of buttons and lots of fancy gizmos. I guess they get a surge of pride to say, my car has got Wi-Fi, I've got YouTube, and I've got video monitors in the back of the seats for the kids to watch. And it's tied in with the ego and tied in with the image. But believe me, when you get to my age and you're struggling to keep all that stuff running, it becomes a lot less attractive. If you have one of those touchscreen computers that are running your car, everything goes through there. If that fails, the car stops. And I think it's like a minimum of $500 to replace that. So I want a car that's going to keep on running even if some of the small bits and pieces don't work anymore, which is the case with our car. The air conditioning stopped working and so forth. But to me, simple is better. I think we've allowed all of our technology, cars, computers, everything, to just become incredibly decadent. Anyway, Sherry, I'm going to let you go. We got another caller waiting very patiently on the phone. So thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Fred in Iowa. Fred, thank you for waiting so patiently. What's on your mind?
Mike, when Jeff was talking, giving his speech, and then he covered a lot of ground, and then you covered all the factions that were involved. You left out one. And if you go and see after Kennedy was elected, 3 months, he gave a speech to the American public, and he was against, or not for, he was against state and church together. That was the crux of the speech, his separation of church and state, which Kennedy was for. Play the speech over again 3 or 4 times and listen to it. The Vatican was in there too.
I have seen absolutely nothing to indicate the Vatican was involved with the JFK assassination. They may be opposed to the idea of separation of church and state. They've certainly voiced that. One of the popes even said the Bill of Rights should never have been written because God does not give freedom of speech and privacy to ordinary people. But that's a religious opinion. I don't think the Vatican really feels like killing people over that issue because it's a sentiment that's shared by the majority of the American people, that the best way to have religious freedom for all is to deny all religion access to civil authority. That was the thinking behind that First Amendment.
The Vatican killed over 50 million people for 1,260 years during the Dark Ages. And you tell me that they don't want to kill anybody?
I didn't say they didn't want to. What I'm saying is I've seen absolutely no evidence to support your theory.
Well, open your eyes, my friend. Have a good day. Thank you, and bye.
Have a good day. We're going to switch over to Bob in Colorado. Aloha, Bob. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I want to talk to you. The last lady you talked to, I can't remember her name. I know
Sherry.
She calls in all the time. And yeah, okay. And she was talking about Walmart and so forth. Well, we have a Safeway here in southern Colorado, and I went in there a few months ago. I'm 66 years old, beard, long hair, and I go in and I went to buy beer one day, and they said, "Where's your driver's license?" So I said, "Well, I don't have a driver's license. I've never been asked for one. I'm 66 years old." So I had to walk out into the parking lot, and I took my time. There was a line, and you know Safeway, they don't hire too many people.
No.
And the line was like a mile long. I took my time, and I did the same thing a couple of weeks later at Walmart. Well, I'll tell you what, the outrage was so bad, they don't card you anymore. I was there last week shopping, and I went to Safeway, and I went to Walmart, and not one question was asked about my credit card. About my driver's license. So, well, you know what? People can make an impact if you really stand up to these people.
Well, it was a stupid thing to do anyway. Our Safeway, they're still asking for your birth date, and they have to actually enter it into the terminal there. And I don't know why. I have no idea. But yeah, the first time they did that to us, and they said, "We need to know your age." And I said, "I'm 12 years old. I look like this because I grew up next to a nuclear reactor." And everybody around me was laughing their heads off because they just know how stupid this policy of carding people who are obviously in their sunset years really is. But as of the last time I bought alcohol at Safeway, which was, 15 minutes ago, they were still asking me for my birthday.
Well, you know what, Mike? I think the whole thing is, again, they want to keep track of every single thing we buy, and if they swipe our driver's license, they all got the thing just like a credit card now, and they think to go through there, okay, you know what, now we can give that to the insurance company sees you're buying a case of beer a week, guess what? You're flagged. Anyway, I had to bring that up. I thought it was so funny when she was talking about that. But
all right, I got to let you go. We got a commercial break. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Last segment of our program today. Now, over at Davos and the World Economic Forum, scientists set up this mock Arctic base camp in an effort to educate world leaders about the threat of human-caused global warming. Little hard getting the message across because Davos has very frigid temperatures, and the mock Arctic base camp is buried under 6 feet of snow. So global warming is not going along with that. Judge Napolitano is out there saying a brave member of Congress needs to step forward and read the FISA memo on the House floor. And how that has come on out. The memo that is out now, it's 100 pages long, and it came out in April of last year. So we're not talking about the 4-page memo that Congress is still screaming about. And at some point, this memo does need to come on out. Apparently, it summarizes what's in the larger memo. And in theory, because there's been more than a year's passed since, or almost a year's passed since that, there'll be new data in it. So we still haven't seen the memo. We've seen a memo, not the memo. Now, do you remember Pablo Escobar? Very, very wealthy drug smuggler. And apparently he was the one who was starting to design these new smuggling submarines. And originally they were just very low boats with snorkels, but apparently they've even found some now that can actually operate as a real submarine. They've got ballast tanks. You know, they can't go very, very deep, but they can definitely completely submerge, and that makes them invisible to radar. And apparently one of these has now been found off the coast of Colombia, and they're going down to check it on out because apparently shortly before Pablo Escobar died, some 50 billion pounds of his personal fortune disappeared. And they're kind of wondering where it might be, and it might actually be in that submarine. That would be a pleasant thing to find. It's the world's biggest lottery. Apparently, Iran is threatening, or is being accused of threatening, U.S. warships during its exercises in the Strait of Hormuz. And this is coming out of Free Beacon. And this is saying that apparently Iranian military leaders claimed Monday that they threatened 2 American-led vessels in international waters. I don't know why they would do that. U.S. military officials confirmed being in contact with Iranian forces. I can't understand why the Iranians would issue a threat unless those U.S. ships were someplace they weren't supposed to be. And there's our music. Please stay tuned to John Stedmiller. He's got a lot of things to share with you. And we'll be back here tomorrow on Republic Broadcasting. Please take what you learn here, share it with everybody. Keep that issue over the FISA memo alive on all your social media, your email, and everywhere. We haven't seen the final memo, just one from a year ago. Who knows what else is out there? So we'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.